I've never been the kind of guy who falls for someone quickly. I mean, I've had crushes, plenty, but they fade, or they end up being more fantasy than anything real. But what happened that night in room 217 wasn't a crush. It was the start of something that's still hard to explain, even now. It all started at a wedding, not mine. My cousin's. I didn't even want to go. I'd RSVP'd yes out of guilt and had been regretting it ever since. I hate weddings. The small talk, the forced dancing, the pressure to look happy when your only date is the 2-drink minimum at the open bar. But family is family, and Mom would have thrown a fit if I bailed. So there I was, in a beige suit that didn't quite fit right, surrounded by people I barely remembered from childhood Thanksgivings. I'd made it through dinner, a cringy father-daughter dance, and half a glass of champagne when I slipped outside to get some air. That's when I saw him. Sitting alone on the low brick wall near the garden lights, his tie loosened and his jacket folded beside him. He had this tired elegance about him, like someone who could charm a room if he wanted but would rather be anywhere else. I wasn't gonna say anything, I swear. But then he looked up and smirked like he'd been expecting me. "You hiding too?" he asked. I laughed, caught off guard. Something like that. He patted the spot next to him. "Best view of the drunk uncles from here." I sat down, and for a few seconds we just watched in silence as one of the groomsmen tried to twerk with a flower girl clapping along. "I'm Mason," he said, offering a hand. "Eli, friend of the groom? Cousin of the bride." "Ah," he nodded. "So we're both only here out of obligation." We talked for what felt like 5 minutes but turned into an hour. He was smart, funny in a low-key way, and had this subtle confidence that made it hard to look away. I don't even remember half of what we talked about. Something about bad dates, mutual disdain for group dances, and whether or not the DJ had a vendetta against good music. But I remember the way he looked at me when I laughed, like he was taking notes, like he saw something I didn't even know I was showing. At some point, Mason checked his watch and stood up. "Hey, this is going to sound forward, but I don't want this to be one of those nights where we regret not doing anything." My heart jumped. "I'm in room 217, he said. "You don't have to come, no pressure, but I'd like it if you did." Then he walked away. I sat there for a good 10 minutes, replaying the conversation in my head, trying to decide if I had imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. Room 217. I told myself I was just gonna say goodbye, that I wasn't the type to do something reckless or spontaneous, that I just wanted to talk. But as I stood in front of the door, my hand hovering over the handle, I knew it wasn't about talking. When the door opened and Mason looked at me like he'd known I'd come the whole time, I stopped lying to myself. Mason didn't speak right away when I stepped into his room. He just watched me, calm, still, like he was trying to read something in my face. Maybe whether I was scared, maybe whether I'd regret this. But I wasn't scared. I was buzzing. The room itself was nothing special. Standard hotel decor, the faint scent of air freshener barely masking whatever industrial cleaner they used. One lamp was on near the bed, casting the place in a soft amber light that made everything look slower, quieter, intimate. I turned to say something, probably something stupid or overly polite like, "So, nice room." But before I could, Mason stepped forward. Not fast, not aggressive, just sure of himself. "You good?" he asked, stopping just in front of me. His voice was lower now, quieter, but it had a weight to it. I nodded. I meant to say something. Really, I did. But all that came out was a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Then his hand was on the side of my face. Gentle. His thumb barely brushed my cheek. "I've been trying to figure out if I should kiss you since the second you sat down," he said. That snapped me out of it. I let out a nervous laugh, the kind that slips out when you don't know what to do with your hands. I thought I was the only one thinking that. You weren't. I didn't think, didn't weigh the pros and cons, didn't second guess. I just leaned in. And when our mouths met, it wasn't the wild, clumsy kind of kiss you get when two people are trying to rush to the next part. It was slow, thoughtful, like we both knew we were crossing a line and wanted to remember exactly what it felt like when we did. His lips were soft, warm. He kissed like he meant it, like he was listening for a rhythm that only we could hear. By the time we pulled apart, my chest was tight and my legs didn't feel entirely stable. "You okay?" he asked again. "Yeah," I said. "More than okay." We sat on the edge of the bed, not touching for a minute. He poured us both a glass of water from a bottle on the nightstand. I took mine with a shaky hand. "You don't do this kind of thing a lot, do you?" Mason said, not unkindly. I shook my head. "Is it that obvious?" He smiled, resting his arm casually along the back of the bed, close but not quite touching me. "Yeah, but it's a good thing. You're here because you wanted to be, not because it's some routine. I like that." I looked at him, really looked. There was a kindness in his eyes, but also something guarded, like someone who'd been through enough to stop assuming anything good would last. I felt that. Maybe that was part of why I was here. Because I knew that feeling too well. He stood and walked toward the window, pulling back the curtain to peek out at the city lights beyond. "Funny how quiet it gets at night," he said. "Even in a packed hotel." I came up behind him, not close enough to press against him, but enough that I could feel the warmth from his back. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to rest my hand on the small of his back or brush his shoulder with my fingertips, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "Why did you invite me up?" Mason turned, surprised by the question. "Because I wanted to see what it would feel like, to not regret something for once." I didn't know what to say to that, but I understood it. He stepped closer again, this time without hesitation. His hands found mine. "You staying?" It wasn't a loaded question. He wasn't pushing, but he was giving me the option, the power, and I think that's what made the answer so easy. "Yeah," I said, "I'm staying." We didn't rush anything after that. We just kept talking. First standing, then lying side by side on top of the comforter like we'd been doing this for years, our shoulders barely touching. His voice kept getting softer as the night wore on, like he didn't want to wake the world up. And somewhere between a story about his awful first apartment and a laugh that made my stomach flip, I realized I wasn't thinking about tomorrow, or whether this would last. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about anything except right now. I don't remember falling asleep, which is weird, because I usually need silence and blackout curtains, just to function. But somehow, wrapped up in that in-between space with Mason, his shoulder occasionally brushing mine, our breathing synced like we'd practiced it. I drifted off without realizing. When I woke up, it was still early. The city outside the window glowed faint orange, soft and muted like it hadn't fully made up its mind to be morning yet. Mason was still asleep beside me, lying on his side, one hand tucked under his cheek, the other resting loosely on his stomach. I just lay there for a while, watching him. There's something oddly intimate about watching someone sleep, especially someone you barely know. He looked different in sleep, softer, less guarded. His jaw wasn't set in that faint tension he wore while awake. His mouth, usually full of wit and casual deflection, was slightly open, his breath slow and even. I found myself counting them, not on purpose. It just felt like the only thing to do. Eventually, he stirred. His eyes blinked open slowly, adjusting to the light. When he saw me watching him, he didn't flinch or pull away. "Hey," he said, voice gravelly from sleep. "Hey," I whispered. We just looked at each other for a second. And not the awkward kind of look that begs for a distraction, but the kind where you're silently checking, "Are you still here with me? Do we still feel the same way we did before we fell asleep?" His eyes were still a little heavy with sleep when he asked, "We good?" "Yeah," I said. "We're good." He smiled and stretched, his shirt riding up slightly to reveal a sliver of toned stomach. I looked away, but not before catching his smirk. "Breakfast?" he asked, sitting up and running a hand through his hair. "Or do we pretend this never happened and ghost each other forever?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Is that your usual post-hookup strategy?" He shot me a mock-offended look. Hey, this was not a hookup. There were 0 clothes removed and at least one emotionally vulnerable conversation. That's basically a relationship in gay guy terms. He was joking. Kind of. But I could see the flicker of something real in his eyes. A test, maybe. A defense mechanism. Like he was used to people checking out emotionally. before they even got their shoes back on. "I'm down for breakfast," I said. "Assuming you're not one of those people who thinks black coffee and a protein bar count." Mason grinned. "Full disclosure, I make amazing pancakes. Prove it." We ended up at a tiny diner 2 blocks from the hotel. One of those places that smelled like syrup and hash browns the second you walked in. The waitress called everyone Han, and the booths were cracked vinyl, but the pancakes were actually incredible. Between mouthfuls of food and endless refills of coffee, the conversation was easier than I expected. We talked about our worst first dates, the time he tried to impress a guy by pretending to be into CrossFit, how I once spilled a smoothie on a Tinder date's dog, the kind of stories that don't usually come out until you're deep into a friendship, or something like it. At one point, I looked up from my plate and caught him watching me, not with amusement, not with curiosity, but with that same quiet intensity I'd seen the night before. "You do this a lot?" I asked. "What?" "This," I said, gesturing between us. "Bringing guys to your room, pancakes the next morning, long talks." He set down his fork. "No, honestly, not even close." I waited, but he didn't elaborate. So I nodded. Good. And that was all I said. Because I didn't need to know the whole story yet. I just needed to know I wasn't a repeat. When we got back to the hotel, checkout was only an hour away. I watched as Mason packed his bag, folded neatly, everything in its place, which surprised me for some reason. I guess I expected chaos, but maybe that was part of him too, keeping it all tight on the outside so no one sees the mess inside. "You heading straight home?" he asked, not looking at me. "Yeah, got work in the morning." He zipped up his bag, then paused, hand still on the strap. I should have asked this last night, but "Are you seeing anyone?" I looked at him. Would I have stayed if I was? He gave a small smile. "Fair point." Then he stepped closer, took a breath, and said, "I want to see you again." Simple. No games, no overthinking. Just a sentence that made my pulse jump a little. "Me too," I said. And just like that, we exchanged numbers. Real ones. No pretense. No promises, either. But maybe something better. Possibility. We texted almost every day after that weekend. It started simple. Memes, random thoughts, a comment on the weird stuff people post on dating apps, but gradually turned into long, thoughtful messages. You know that feeling when you're waiting for a reply? And your phone lights up and it's them? Yeah. That. I hadn't had that in a while. Mason wasn't exactly what I expected him to be. He had this charm that made people gravitate toward him, sure, but he wasn't flashy about it. He was actually kind of a nerd. A huge sci-fi guy, loved obscure documentaries about deep-sea creatures, could quote Star Trek better than any straight bro I knew could quote Tarantino. And he listened. Like, really listened. Remembered little things I'd mentioned offhand. My coffee order, how I hated my boss, the weird green couch in my apartment I swore I'd replace but never did. After about 2 weeks of late-night texting and early morning voice notes, we made plans to meet again. Not a hotel this time, a real date. We chose this tiny Thai place tucked behind a bookstore downtown. Mason showed up in a navy blue sweater that brought out the color in his eyes. Not that I noticed right away, except yeah, I absolutely did. "You clean up nice," I said as he slid into the booth across from me. He grinned. "I try. Gotta impress the guy who steals all my memes." Dinner was good. Comfortable. No awkward silences, no reaching for topics. We just clicked. It felt like continuing a conversation we'd paused, not starting one from scratch. After we ate, we walked around the city, just talking. It was cold out, so we shared my scarf, our shoulders pressed together. I remember thinking, this is what it's supposed to feel like. When we reached my place, I hesitated. I didn't know if I should invite him up, if we were rushing into something again. But Mason didn't make it weird. He just leaned in and kissed me, soft, slow, and said, "Text me when you're in," and he left. No pressure, no expectation, just a good night. The next few weeks passed in this strange mix of new and familiar. We'd meet up on weekends, grab dinner, crash on each other's couches, watching movies we barely finished. He'd curl up next to me and fall asleep with his head on my shoulder. And I'd just sit there pretending to focus on the TV, trying not to fall too hard, too fast. One night, I brought him to a small party a coworker was throwing. Nothing wild, just drinks and charcuterie and Spotify playlists someone had spent way too long curating. It was the first time we were around people as a couple, even though we hadn't called it that yet. I introduced him as my friend Mason, and he didn't flinch. Just smiled, shook hands, made everyone laugh. But later, on the balcony while we shared a cigarette neither of us actually wanted, he looked at me and said, "So, am I just your friend?" I blinked. No, I just didn't want to make it weird. Weird how? I don't know. For them, for you. Mason was quiet for a second, then looked at me. It's not weird for me, unless it's weird for you. It's not, I said, maybe too quickly. Then slower, quieter. It's not. He nodded. Okay. Then next time, let's skip the friend part. That conversation stuck with me. Because for years, I'd been cautious. Careful. I didn't bring guys around people. I didn't hold hands in public unless it was dark or crowded enough to disappear. I always convinced myself it was just easier that way. But Mason didn't want to be a secret, and something about that made me want to stop hiding too. The real shift came the night he stayed over for the first time. Not crashing, not mid-movie nap, but actually staying, with toothbrushes side by side and his duffel bag unzipped on my floor. We ordered Chinese, stayed up too late watching some awful monster movie from the 80s, and by the time we climbed into bed, he looked at me and said, "I've never done this before." I frowned. Done what? Let it get this far. I didn't ask what this meant. I knew. So I just said, "Me either." And he smiled, kissed me, and pulled the blanket over both of us like we'd done it 100 times before. Falling for someone isn't like it is in the movies. There's no dramatic swell of music, no slow motion running through the rain. It's quieter than that. It's the way Mason would instinctively reach for my hand when we crossed the street. The way he'd text me after meetings just to say, "Hope you're having a good day," with a gif of some ridiculous cartoon animal. It was little things, always the little things. But love, even when it creeps in gently, still demands space. And the deeper we got into this thing, whatever we were, the more the rest of our lives started pressing in on us. Mason was applying for a new position in his firm, something big. Something that would mean more money, more travel, more hours. I was still stuck at my job, which I'd begun to resent more by the day. The late nights, the last-minute deadlines, the feeling of creative drain that left me too tired to even sketch for fun anymore. We were both chasing something, and that chase made the space between us feel thinner, tighter. One night, Mason came over late. He looked exhausted. His tie was loose, his eyes shadowed with stress. I barely said hello before he flopped on the couch and groaned. "Rough day?" I asked, sitting beside him. "More like rough month," he muttered. He leaned into me and rested his head on my shoulder, sighing so deeply it rattled my chest. "They're offering me the promotion," he said after a minute. My heart skipped. "That's great, right?" He hesitated. "It's in Chicago." The words dropped like a stone in my stomach. "Chicago," I repeated dumbly. "Yeah. They want me to start in 6 weeks." I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, staring at the muted TV screen, a commercial playing for something we'd never buy. "It's a good opportunity," he said quietly, like he was trying to convince both of us. I nodded. "Yeah, it is." He pulled back to look at me. "I haven't said yes yet, but you're going to." He didn't answer. That silence said everything. I wanted to be happy for him. I was happy for him. But I also felt like someone had opened a trapdoor under us. We'd just gotten to the part where things felt steady, real, and now this. We didn't talk much after that. He stayed the night, but we didn't touch. Just lay side by side in my bed, our backs barely grazing. The next morning, I kissed his cheek goodbye, like I always did. but it felt different. He lingered at the door for a second too long, then left without looking back. That whole week felt like a countdown. I told myself I wasn't going to bring it up, that if he was going to leave, I didn't want to be the reason he hesitated. But the closer we got to the decision, the more it ate at me. On Friday night, I cracked. We were watching some documentary about shipwrecks, one of Mason's picks, and I just blurted it out. "So what's the plan? Are you taking it?" He paused the TV, turned to me. "I don't know. You said they need an answer by Monday." "I know." I looked at him, really looked. "Do you want to go?" He opened his mouth, then shut it, then finally said, "I want the job. I don't want to leave you." That did something to my chest, something sharp. "So what do we do?" I asked, even though I didn't really want to hear the answer. "I don't know," he said again, softer this time. I've never had to factor someone else in before. Neither of us said it, but the air was thick with the unspoken truth. This could be the end of whatever we were building. "I can't ask you to stay," I said finally. "And I can't ask you to come with me," he added. The quiet that followed wasn't hostile. It was sad, honest. I reached for his hand. "We've got the weekend," I said. "Let's not waste it." So we didn't. We made pancakes Saturday morning, the way he liked them, burnt on one side. We walked through the park, his hand in mine, like we had all the time in the world. We talked about nothing. We held on to the seconds. Sunday night, as we lay in bed, he whispered, "You've been the best surprise of my life." I didn't say anything. I just curled closer, because I knew the goodbye was coming. And I wasn't ready. He left Monday morning. The cab pulled up just before sunrise, headlights sweeping across the wet pavement outside my apartment, like stage lights on a set neither of us wanted to perform on. He didn't bring much, 2 suitcases and a carry-on. The rest of his things he said he'd figure out later. We stood by the curb, the city still half asleep around us. He looked down at his shoes, then back up at me with that tired half smile I'd grown used to, the one he wore when he didn't know what else to say. "I don't do long distance well," he said quietly. "Me neither," I replied. It wasn't angry. There were no fights, no ultimatums, just the soft ache of 2 people who wanted to be in the same place and couldn't figure out how to make it happen. "I meant everything I said," Mason added, voice rough like he hadn't slept. "I didn't think I'd meet someone like you. Not now." I nodded, throat tight. "Yeah, same." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small piece of folded paper, pressed it into my hand. "Don't open it yet," he said. "Wait till I'm gone." Then he kissed me. Not the soft, nervous kiss of that first night in room 217. Not the playful ones we'd shared between making dinner or pausing movies. This one was slow, sure, and sad. A full stop. Then he got into the cab. I stood on the sidewalk until the car turned the corner and disappeared. Only then did I unfold the note. His handwriting was messy, slanted, rushed, but I read it twice. "If this ends here, I want you to know I'm better for having met you. If it doesn't, and we somehow find our way back to each other, I'll be in room 217, same hotel, every year, same weekend, just in case." I didn't cry. Not then. I went back upstairs, sat on the couch, and just stared at the spot where his duffel had been. 6 months later, my phone buzzed during lunch. A new message, no name, just a number I hadn't saved but knew by heart. "Made it. Promotion's been brutal but good. You still using that awful green couch?" I stared at it for a long time before typing back. "Yeah, still hasn't fallen apart yet. Thinking of trading it in though, might have room for something better." His reply was instant. "Keep it, I kinda miss it." And just like that, something cracked open again. Just a little. A year later, I checked into a familiar hotel, told myself it was for the memories. For closure. I booked room 217 without thinking. When I opened the door, he was already inside. No bags, just him. He looked up from where he was sitting on the edge of the bed, that same crooked grin on his face. "I was hoping you'd remember." I dropped my bag and crossed the room. And when I kissed him, it wasn't like the first time. Or the goodbye. It was something new, something still writing itself.